Hi, welcome to Rachel and Ralph's Reality Check, where we give you the inside scoop on what's going on behind the scenes, because we both are longtime politicos, having worked for politicians. Ralph's been in DC for over 35 years. Ralph is the head of the Capitalist League and writes a regular column for Newsmax. I have been a longtime contributor to Townhall. I run Intellectual Conservative, and I've worked in the media in recent years. And so we're going to fill you in and give you the real deal on issues. And today we're going to tell you about our latest couple of columns we wrote. I wrote about Karens for Townhall, and Ralph wrote about neoliberalism for Newsmax. And then we'll round it out with our Blue Collar Blues segment, where we're going to discuss how blue collar people are now getting white collar jobs. So we'll start with my article, which is basically a rant about how the left is now using the term Karen, which was made a derogatory phrase, to label conservative women. And any conservative woman who voices up, let's say you attend a school board meeting and you want to complain about critical race theory, you are now labeled a Karen. And nobody wants to be labeled it, because the name went viral due to women behaving in ways that everybody did not like, looked down on, and it's not fair, because the name actually originated, according to a petition that's been started to get rid of the name, by people labeling white liberal women Karens, because apparently these women were complaining about Black children's lemonade stands. And as many of you know, the right has been the one that has been fighting to allow children to have lemonade stands. The right-leaning Institute for Justice has been engaged in lawsuits for years over this. So it's time to end calling people Karens. I'm sick and tired of being called a Karen. I don't go around complaining to management. That's just not my style. I don't have short blonde hair and a bob. I don't think I fit the stereotype, but it doesn't matter, because they're going to label all conservative women that way. And so, Ralph, you had some interesting things to say about this last week.
Listen, I take a certain pride in your having written this column, because I triggered you at the end of last week's show by calling you a Karen. and you were outraged, and of course I admitted that I was just joking, and that you rose to the bait in a very satisfying way. But the fact of the matter is one of my dearest old friends is named Karen, and she is a conservative. She's a Republican, conservative-ish woman. Lives out in People's Republic of California, and she is furious that her name has been taken in vain, and that her name has been used to imply a certain kind of privileged and shallow, opinionated kind of person, none of which is she. She's kind of privileged, but she's not shallow, and well, she is kind of opinionated. So, okay, 1 for 3. The fact of the matter, though, is that we are involved in not a culture war, and lots of my conservative friends mistake what's going on for a culture war. We are involved in a cultural revolution, which is far, far more serious. Okay, a culture war implies you got one side, you got the other side, they're clashing on more or less equal terms. No. We are having the actual foundation of our civilization undermined and attacked in a very conscious, very conscientious way by some very shrewd strategists who are following the work of a long forgotten, except for by nerds like me, Marxist philosopher named Antonio Gramsci, who was the head of the Italian Communist Party and was heroically thrown in jail because he was an anti-fascist, not because he was a communist, but the fascist government saw him as an enemy of the state, which indeed he was, and good for him. But he wrote these things called prison notebooks, and it was torture, and he died very young. But he was the one who actually laid down the blueprint by which the modern left prosecutes its cultural revolution. And one of his fundamental axioms was something called cultural hegemony. And every culture has a series of normative axioms. The American cultural hegemony was in the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men were created equal, and they're endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, and among these rights are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and that the legitimacy of the government comes from the consent of the governed. Okay, that was the foundation of that was America's mission statement, and it's been America's mission statement, and the left is attacking it across the board and attempting to replace it with a nihilistic, extreme egalitarianism. But it's not just egalitarianism where we're all equal, because Americans believe in equality of opportunity, and then let the more talented and the harder working and people of better character rise and achieve better outcomes for themselves. But equality of opportunity is very much part of what we say is our cultural hegemony. No, they want equality of result. Everybody is exactly the same. We're all wearing little red guard now jackets and little green hats. And, and by the way, they're breaking down all distinctions, no matter how organic, between male and female. So the idea of organically differentiated genders is a thought crime for them. It's heresy. So when they're attacking using ridicule, which they got from your buddy Saul Alinsky, I think it's Rule 5.
And who was head of the Institute for Saul Alinsky?
I'm sorry, it was not the Institute. Saul was never institutionalized. I was the founder and original president of the Saul Alinsky Center, chaired by Saul's son, David Alinsky. And we had a board of advisors from Grover Norquist on the right to Joan Blades, the co-founder of MoveOn.org on the left, in an effort to bring the truth about Saul Alinsky forward, which was he stood for justice. He stood for Russian justice, particularly racial justice, so passionately that he carried a concealed handgun with him. He was pro-carried concealed, tell it to the NRA. David, his son, still has the handgun because he was getting death threats from the KKK for his fighting for racial justice, which he was relentless about, but not using state power. He fought for it using social power, picketing department stores that refused to hire African Americans, conducting public relation campaigns against Kodak, who refused to hire and promote to executive status African Americans. He was very passionate about justice, but he was also death to big government. He called LBJ's war on poverty, publicly he attacked it as political pornography. And so people who think that, and by the way, Saul Alinsky was cleared by J. Edgar Hoover's FBI of all charges that he was somehow conniving with communists, or was a communist, or was a Marxist, or anything. He was absolutely cleared of that. But he did one thing that he came up with his 13 rules for radicals, which were tactical rules about how to be effective. And one of those rules I've taken him to task for an article, and that is ridicule is man's most potent weapon. He let the ridicule genie out of the bottle, and it has metastasized, particularly on the left, who is very quick to ridicule. But there was one leftist who I think you probably would like and appreciate, Rachel Alexander. Her name was
anyone out there?
Her name was Hillary Rodham, and she wrote her master's thesis. She wrote her honors thesis about Saul Alinsky and his work. Although she turned aside from Alinsky, she said, in order to be effective, you have to go inside the system, not push the system from the outside, which was the Alinsky method, community organizing. Okay, but she said, and I think you will agree, that Alinsky's tactics without Alinsky's ethics are toxic. And this calling suburban mothers and women who are, whether they're conservative or progressive or whatever, them ridiculing them by calling them Karens, is the toxic nature of Alinsky tactics without Alinsky's ethics, his commitment to justice.
Well, you know, I'll never agree with you on Alinsky, but I do admit he was a brilliant man. I do admit I use some of his tactics to a limited degree. I just need to see a litmus, you know, of all the issues that he's conservative on besides being, you know, against using the government to do things. If you can show me he's pro-life and you can show me he's for lower regulations and lower taxes and, you know, things like that, I mean, he might be a little more appealing, but there's enough negatives about him that I'm never going to be a fan. But I will tell you this, I don't know, based on your knowledge of Alinsky, that I really want to devote a show to debating you about him because I would probably lose.
Well, let's just say this. According to his table talk, according to his son, David, who I'm now out of touch with because David is a progressive in a way that Saul never was. And I am not, being the second most conservative man in the world. He was.
Did the publication call you that? Or?
The Washington Post quoted me as calling myself the second most conservative man in the world for my advocacy of the gold standard. And the most conservative man is my friend Benny Seneca, who is an elder of the Israelite Samaritan people, who lives by a 3,000-year-old biblical code that is older than Christianity, older than Islam, and older than Judaism. So he's a fascinating guy, and he is, in fact, a descendant of the Good Samaritan and one of the elders of the lost tribes of Israel. That said, Karen, non-Karen, okay, I think I've said my piece about your column, which I applaud, standing up for the dignity of women to be fully expressed with their ideas, whether they're progressive or whether they're conservative, and not being subject to ridicule for them. Right on.
Well, and I'll just end this segment by saying that I think men need to stand up for women here, because a lot of us women have been standing up for men as they've been attacked, you know, especially white men, you know, are now under attack. So now they're moving on to white women and you know, women in general, and they're really going to have it the worst for minority women who are conservative, because that's how the left operates, you know. And like you said, this is just part of their tactics of ridicule, where they started with white men, they tore them down, now they're moving on to white women, and you know, who's going to be their next, you know, target? It just goes on and on until we see the left attacking its own. I mean, I record incidents every day on social media of the left turning on somebody else on the left side, because you know, they're the party of groups. They're not the party of individualism. So eventually one group is going to conflict with another group. It's just inevitable. But anyway, let's move on to.
But I'm agreeing with you, Rachel, but just let me say, you know, whenever I see the left attacking the left, I'm like, game on!
They're doing the work for us.
But the converse of that, this is a perfect segue, is when the right attacks the right. And we're getting that now, and it is very distressing, although I would call the attackers people like Josh Hawley, Senator Hawley from Missouri, not actually authentically conservatives. They are reactionaries who are positioning themselves as conservatives, but it's a kind of false conservatism because they are not standing for liberty. They are trying to position themselves as sort of demagogues, populists, or I would say phony populists, sort of like Huey Long, who are trying to rouse the Trumpan proletariat to anger against people who are successful. I call that the violating the commandment against "Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife or ox or ass," or whatever it happens to be. Okay, this covetousness, when you're successful, when you're highly successful, like say a digital media company, and then all of a sudden, you know, you become fair game, and instead of fighting for free enterprise and for success in the free enterprise system, you get guys like Josh Hawley who are making common cause with people like Elizabeth Warren, although that might be Ted Cruz, another one, who basically said, let's break up these big successful companies with antitrust law. And, you know, antitrust law is there to prevent collusion between companies, thereby maintaining competition, and of which we are the beneficiaries. Now, the philosophy behind that is called neoliberalism, and neoliberalism says we need to have a very vibrant free market with minimal taxes, minimal regulation, minimal government intervention. And one of the oddball things about this, by the way, is that the Nordic states in Europe, like Denmark, which a lot of people think of as socialists, score, according to places like Cato and Heritage, as more capitalistic than the United States, because they are more respectful of, they have less regulation, they have more free markets. Now, they do have social democracy, which is different from democratic socialism, in which they have a lot of social insurance, so that everybody pays stiff taxes, and everybody gets opulent benefits in terms of health insurance and education and some of the basic necessities of life. It's a species of capitalism called socially conscious free markets, or ordoliberalism. On the other end of the spectrum is, of course, Singapore, and used to be Hong Kong, where you have laissez-faire capitalism, where you've got no benefits, no taxes, and you just, you expect that the private sector will provide all of these goods, services, and benefits more effectively than the state-sponsored social insurance. That said, the guy who founded libertarianism, although he himself was not a libertarian, was Friedrich Hayek, the Nobel Prize-winning economist, who wrote the core scripture of libertarianism, The Road to Serfdom, which was excerpted by the Reader's Digest and became a mass sensation in the United States back in, I think it was about 1947. And Hayek, in The Road to Serfdom, said there is nothing anti-liberty with state-provided social insurance, provided it was done in an unintrusive way. So Hayek was all for Medicare, or all for Social Security, but notice both of these are paid for by the beneficiaries. I pay a certain amount every year. I paid a certain amount every year as long as I worked, and that went toward funding my Social Security retirement benefits. It did not come out of the general treasury. It's a self-funded social insurance program for retirees, in which my taxes pay for my benefits. Now, is it perfect? No. You need to keep economic growth rates up over 3.3% in order for it to remain viable. And for Medicare to remain viable, you need to keep your growth rate up closer to 4%. And frankly, we haven't seen that in 20 years. We got that under Reagan, we got that under Clinton. We didn't get it under either Bush or Obama or Trump. So our elected officials need to work harder to keep our growth rates up, to allow our social insurance programs to remain viable. But there you go. That's all part of neoliberalism, and I'm a big fan. But Josh Hawley and Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren and Ted Cruz are now making neoliberalism, which made America prosperous and free, their favorite punching bag. So you go defend them for me, please.
I knew you were going to say that, because I don't think it's as easy and black and white as that. I feel like the reason, Cruz and Hawley are criticizing neoliberalism, which I think you've also said is the same thing as supply side economics, is because they have other issues with these big tech companies. They don't like the privacy invasions. They don't like the data collection. that might be more why they want to break them up. And there are two sides to antitrust laws. You know, I come down on the what I think is the authentic conservative side, which is you are against these antitrust laws. When I was in law school, I wrote my main paper on why we shouldn't break up Microsoft as an antitrust laws. So, you know, I can kind of see where these guys are coming from. I'd like to hear more, because I really like Ted Cruz. So I would like to hear more about him really, you know, being aggressive on the antitrust issue, because I just can't see him coming down, you know, with the big liberals on this one.
Well, he's been caught in bed with Elizabeth Warren. So if you don't consider her to be, and I won't grace her with being a liberal. I'm a liberal. A liberal believes in certain inalienable rights, and Elizabeth Warren never saw a right that she didn't want to alienate. She's a progressive. Call her out for what she is, okay? She's a progressive, and that, by the way, is a euphemism for totalitarian. So what the heck Ted Cruz is doing playing footsie with Elizabeth Warren? You do some research and you explain that to me next week, and maybe if you can come up with a clever enough story, I'll cut him some slack. But, you know, I don't like the idea of big government hippie punching successful companies, particularly when China has announced they're taking over the technology sector. And for Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley to be attempting to injure or even destroy our most successful tech companies strikes me as just deplorable. And by the way, I am one of Hillary's deplorables, so I don't throw that word around lightly.
Well, I think pretty much anybody on the right is considered one of her deplorables. I mean, all the 70 million people who voted for Trump, I mean, she basically thinks we're scumbags, but
wait a second.
MSM gives her a free pass.
I thought it was 75 million. Whose side are you on? That sounds like fake. 70 million sounds like fake news to me.
Yeah, you're right. It was probably more like 80 million, you know, with all the voter fraud.
Okay, well, I'm out of time, so you have the last word on why Josh Hawley is a saint for trying to destroy free market capitalism. Go ahead.
I have not read anything about this. I have only heard what you have told me. So this is your area, you know, economics. So I'm not even going there either way. I think it's just far more nuanced than you present it. And, you know, I'm a free market supply sider myself. So
I know.
That's
so
pretty much where
I
am.
Don't go giving aid and comfort to the enemy, tail gunner Josh Hawley. Okay. And then we can now pivot to talking about that wonderful article you found about how people are becoming trained getting on the job training so that they can move without taking on student debt and without becoming heavily burdened with all of those supposed federal subsidies that end up turning them into debt slaves, that they can enter the workforce as an unskilled worker and get trained to become semi-skilled and then get trained to get skilled until they're making upper middle class wages from on-the-job training. I was thrilled to see that. So bring it on, Rachel.
Yeah, I mean, basically what's happening, this is one of the few good effects from COVID, is, you know, people are going back into the job market now and they don't fit the jobs. Jobs have changed. You know, when you got Joe Biden giving massive subsidies to Amway, you know, who can live in, you know, Delaware and work for Amway? So there's just a lack of fit. And so people are having to adapt, and these big companies have a shortage of white collar workers, these big tech companies, because if you think about it, the definition of tech, to be in the tech industry, has vastly expanded. It's, you know, I used to be in the tech industry 20 years ago, and we were a pretty narrow area back then. You know, that was a big deal that I did tech support. Now, everybody is in tech support / you know, SEO / something related to that. And so there is no reason why a lot of former blue collar people can't do some of these jobs. They all don't require, you know, vast computer degrees and things like that. And I like to point out, you know, this personal example. one of my clients needed somebody for a position to add SEO to articles. And so I was able to just grab somebody I knew who I trusted. I didn't even ask him what his background was. I didn't ask him for a resume. I don't even know if he has a college degree. And I was able to train him in 2 hours. And so he's worked out just fine. He's been doing SEO for my client for a week now.
Rachel, would you please tell our less techno-babble savvy listeners, one or two of them out there, what SEO is? I know, and you know, but not everybody knows. That's a pretty sophisticated concept.
Yeah, I've been in the industry way too long. SEO is a big part of tech now. It means search engine optimization. And if you're going to put anything on the internet and expect anybody to read it for it to go viral, you need to pay attention to SEO, which means anything from adding tags to an article to, hitting.
You're descending into jargon again. Okay, not all of our listeners know what a tag is. Okay, they think it's something that they get from their dry cleaner or something. So when you're talking about a tag in an article, you're talking about, I know you're talking about meta tags, okay, but that's not really very helpful. Would you please?
Okay, so the hidden.
And by the way, let's simplify this just a little further, okay? When you go to the internet, okay, you use a search engine, and there's a really, really good chance that you're going to be using Google because it is by far the best search engine. You could use Bing, you could use Safari, you have got plenty of choices, but the free market, unmolested by the Josh Hawleys of this world, have moved to Google as their preferred search engine just because it's the best. Okay, they have tried this and same thing with Chrome. Internet Explorer was the
leading browser,
the browser of choice until Chrome came along, and it was so much better that people tried it, and within about 3 years, it had pushed aside all of the other browsers just because it was the best. And by the way, free. The search is free, the browser's free, and by the way, they're not interested in what you're looking at as there's no money in that in their businesses. They want to be able to find out what their broad audiences are looking at so that they can tell their advertisers, these people are looking at subjects that make us believe, will probably make you believe, you do the math, that they're looking for your products or products like yours. So why sell icicles to Eskimos? Because the Eskimos have an infinite supply of icicles until climate change helps warm them up a little bit. Sell the icicles to Phoenicians, people in Phoenix, like say this person whose name we don't know, but whose ISP number we have, Rachel Alexander, who's sitting there in 109-degree heat and probably would love to buy your icicles if they're priced right and delivered easily. Okay, that's where this browsing comes from, and that's where search comes from. But so I'm just trying to take this down to the layperson level. So me as just a general search person looking for something, how does Google know how to find it? What does Google find that will then direct me to the right websites rather than the wrong websites? And by the way, help their advertisers figure out whether I'm a good prospect or not. Now, Rachel, that's a big setup for you as to what SEO is, what tags are, what is the technology involved, and why can somebody without a college degree and with 2 hours training teach a website to be more easily and quickly found by Google because it's got the stuff that I'm looking for. Okay, what's the trick there? Give us the 2-minute tutorial on how we could optimize our search engine functions.
Well, the meta tags are just language that you add behind the scenes that Google can see, but your average person surfing the internet can't easily notice it on your content. So, that's a big part of SEO is adding all this hidden language. And then there's other little small things like how you write the article, what words you include, how you do your headings. And, you have to make certain words very prevalent. It's a bit of a science. And but anybody can do it without a college degree. You don't need anything other than just a little bit of training. And I am going to push back on you. Maybe Google is, the best search engine, but I get by just fine using Brave for my browser and DuckDuckGo for my search engine. I do admit occasionally I have issues. And so if I'm doing a search and I can't find what I want, I will turn over to Google. But I've got all the, privacy blockers set up, so Google is not tracking me. And I recommend everybody do it. I mean, it doesn't take that long just to have your system set up. It's annoying.
I tried the Brave browser and I hated it. I do use DuckDuckGo on my handheld because I enabled it once and I'm too much of a technological ignoramus to figure out how to turn it off. So I'm stuck with it. It doesn't really seem to be, it's impairing my ability to browse in very minor fashions. And I just, someday when I'm out in Phoenix or when you're in the nation's capital where our tax dollars go to die, I'm going to hand you my iPhone 6SX and say, turn that damn DuckDuckGo thing off, would you please? It annoys me, and I just don't know how to.
And that's how Google lures you in. They basically make everything seem so smooth and seamless, and you don't have to do anything. We just track every little tiny dinky thing you do and store this huge, database on you. And if you don't like it, too bad.
If you don't like it, you can go to your personal database. It's right in your account, and you can erase it all with 2 clicks. So if you want to absolutely erase every jot and tittle of your Google browsing history, you have that right. So don't be so high and mighty with them. They're not like the phone company. We don't have to. We're the phone company. It's right in there. You want to eliminate your browsing history, but before you do, Rachel, I want to take a peek at what you're hiding because it sounds might be risky.
Yeah, my searches are kind of boring. Although when I'm looking up weird health problems for other people to help them, I really don't want those searches out there,
Okay, all right, good. Okay, Rachel, it's it is the 31 minutes and 7 seconds have flown by, so it's now up to you to bid our listeners a fond adieu until next time.
All right, thanks everybody for listening. And next week we will discuss why the left is wrong about Trump being destroyed. That's my next column. And we will talk with you next week.
And my next column is about how I introduce Joe Biden, radical pragmatist, to Saul Alinsky, pragmatic radical.
Oh no. Okay. God bless everyone.